Dave, so why don't you introduce yourself to the group, what you do, and what's your expertise in DevOps?
Hello, my name is Dave Mangot. I help portfolio companies deliver software faster and with greater confidence. And to do all that, there's probably an awful lot of things that go into that. But I got involved in the DevOps movement pretty much from the very beginning. Famously, I guess the DevOps movement kicked off either when Patrick Dubois and Andrew Schaefer were trying to meet each other at an Agile conference to talk about Agile infrastructure, or it kicked off in 2009 with Paul Hammond and John Alspaugh doing their 10 deploys a day Dev and Ops cooperation at Flickr talk. But I've known most of those folks since about that time and have been involved in transforming companies like Salesforce, SolarWinds more recently, and then a few years ago, I started my own consulting company, Mango Tech, because I was like, hey, I could, instead of working for other companies and doing this, I could do this for a job. I could help companies work on getting faster, deploying with more confidence, delivering better results to the market quickly. And so I've sort of been on a journey doing that ever since.
Fantastic. Yeah, it's great to have such an experienced speaker today. And by the way, your experience in consulting, this is also, I'm sure, interesting to the group. So there will be opportunity in the breakout rooms to talk about that specifically. So let me ask you, the first question. So what sort of problem does DevOps solve actually, and how does it do it?
So, Satya Nadella is famous for saying every company is a software company. And if every company is a software company, then what does that mean for all of us who are working at these software companies? I think it's really important for people to realize that you don't have to just work at some SaaS or something like that to be a software company. If you're working at a healthcare company, it's a software company now. If you're working in financial services, it's a software company now. And yes, I've also worked with, healthcare and financial services companies in the past few years. But, really the thing that we're starting to learn about software delivery is that it has a bottom line for the business. It has a bottom line whether the businesses are going to succeed or fail. And so Gene Kim said a few months ago, it's not about how big you are anymore, it's speed. It's how fast you can go. And so we learned from the State of DevOps report in 2019 that companies that are the highest performers are twice as likely to meet or exceed their organization's performance goals. And they wound up writing an entire book about that, right? The Accelerate book, which was the companion book that everybody loves to check out the 4 KPIs in there, deployment frequency, lead time for changes, change failure rate, and time to recover. But if you listen to those 4 metrics, right, 2 of them are focused on speed, the delivery cadence and, lead time for changes, and 2 of them are focused on quality. So I like to, when I'm talking to people about DevOps, that's really the focus that we kind of have to look at. And it's not a trade-off between speed and quality. It's we need to be able to do both. We need to deliver with speed and with quality. And then the organizations that are able to do this are going to outperform their competition. And we know this, right? We know this from the State of DevOps report. There's math to prove it. And so if you're in competition with other companies, do you want to have twice the chance of meeting and exceeding your performance goals? And those performance goals can be anything, right? They can be market share, they can be customer satisfaction, they can be revenue, like all of these things like we've proven. So if I'm in competition, I want my best chance to win. And so DevOps is really this accelerator that gives us that ability. The thing that I love about it personally, is that not only do we deliver faster and with quality, but we do it where everybody has a better job. Everybody likes the work that they do. They're more engaged. the key to being a high performer is not to burn people out. And so people get like, oh, we're going to go fast. It's not a whip. Like, that's not how we go fast. And there's an old adage in Agile that says you got to go slow to go fast. And I think that's really awesome how that ties in really well with DevOps.
Okay, so can you explain that? So how do you go fast? So you mentioned the accelerate metrics about speed and quality. So how do you actually achieve that?
Well, I mean, kind of getting back to what we talked about earlier, it's, delivering with speed and with quality means that, there's a lot of different components to that, but like, I would take my inspiration first from the continuous delivery book by, Dave Farley and Jez Humble, where they're talking about feedback. And like, feedback now becomes like really central to the core of what we're trying to do. Because if I can get fast feedback on what I'm doing, then I can respond to the market or to customer demands or to CVE that gets released that's a 0 day that affects my entire infrastructure or whatever. Those are important. And then the flip side of that is quality, right? I don't want to just ship garbage. Like, shipping garbage to production, my site goes down, yay, great way to lose customers, right? I mean, after a while, people just stop coming back. And so you have to be able to do both of those things in order for that to work.
Okay, so what's the relationship between DevOps and automation?
Automation is a way to go fast, and it's a way of doing it with quality. So, if I can go fast by sitting down at the AWS console and clicking on a bunch of stuff. Maybe I can go way faster if I can automate that. If I want to deploy, 500 Reddit servers, how do I do that? With, by clicking around the AWS console. The other thing that automation does for us is it gives us the quality, because, we all know that if you are a human and you sit down to click 500 times to set up Reddit servers, there is a 0.000% chance that all 500 of those Reddit servers are going to come up perfectly with the right security groups distributed across the right availability zones, yada, 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 all those things. It's a pipe dream. Like, there's no way that that's going to happen. So the automation allows us to deliver with speed, but also with quality, because that's what we're going for here, right? And so it's just an accelerator, and it's been fascinating to watch the progression in the industry over time of how we're doing this automation, right? Like, when I first got on AWS and whatever that was, 2008 or whatever, there was S3, and then there was EC2, and I think there was also like one other thing, like maybe one of the queuing systems or something like that. And, then there was Puppet and Chef, and now there's like Terraform, and now we're moving into serverless. And, in all these cases, obviously operations is going to have no purpose anymore, except for the fact that it still does. And so, that automation piece that you're talking about, I think it's really important, even when we're talking about it in like the DevOps context, because there's so many times that I've heard like, oh, well, the software developers would just write the automation and then we'll be done. And we don't need ops anymore. And that turns out that, like, for DevOps, you still need people concerned with ops, and you still need people concerned with dev.
Okay, got it. You mentioned once to me, and also I think you wrote an article on that subject, that there's no such thing as DevSecOps. So it kind of ties to what you said. So, okay, so we still need the dev people, we still need the operations people. Do we still need the security people? I suppose yes. But so what is DevSecOps in all that?
Yeah, so the point of the article wasn't so much about who we don't need. It was more about this idea of systems thinking for delivering software. So being able to deliver, fast and with quality is not just in the realm of dev and ops, right? If we want to have optimal throughput through our system, and so there's a great article on the IT Revolution website that's crazy old at this point, called The 3 Ways by Gene Kim. And the first way is systems thinking. The second way is about feedback loops. And the third way is basically a culture of experimentation, and that repetition and practice lead to mastery. But if we're going to look at it from systems thinking, right, what you're trying not to do is to have local optimization. Because and for anyone who's read the Goal by Goldratt, right, if you have work flowing through a system and then you make part of the system go faster, if the part of the system that's going faster isn't the constraint, then what have you really done? And so like the great example in the factory is like, maybe I have some machine that paints things. And so I'm, getting whatever these widgets are over to the painting machine. If I get more widgets to the painting machine and the painting machine is my bottleneck, who cares? All I'm going to do is back up all these widgets in front of the painting machine now. And like, now I have more work, getting produced in the front of the system, but I have absolutely more work making it to the end of the system. And so this idea that there's no such thing as DevSecOps is really that we need to look at the entire system. We need to get that talk is a little bit more about building quality in, like from a Deming perspective, but we need to look at marketing, we need to look at legal, we need to look at security, we need to look at all these different players and how they fit into the system. Because one of the examples I give in there, to tie that into our marketing stuff is, what if I ship a ton of product, we get all this stuff out into production and nobody knows about it? Our customers don't know about it. The press doesn't know about it. Nobody knows about it. Then like, now I'm sort of relying on word of mouth, maybe from our customers who discover it organically, or maybe through some banner we put on the website. Like, that's not enough, right? We need to include even marketing inside this system, so that when our product gets out into the marketplace, it's available and people know that it's there. Because who cares if I have the absolute best widget in the world if nobody buys it? And you've heard about this from startups, right? Like, they had the best technology, how come they didn't win? Oh, they said we don't need salespeople. Well, turns out if you want to be a successful business, you have to sell product.
All right, so let's say you're talking to a CTO who says, this is great, I want all that DevOps stuff, I want that systems thinking. So how are they supposed to implement it step by step? How would you recommend they start, and how do they introduce it gradually? By the way, to all of you listening, you can type in the questions on the chat and I'm happy to ask them as we go.
The first step to what is it? There's this like a great thing, like the first step to getting better is admitting you have a problem. Right. Yeah. So, a lot of times I talk to CTOs or COOs, and, they'll say things to me like, my ops team can't keep up with my dev team, or, the company's grown organically over time, and the things that were working for us 6 months ago, they're just not working for us anymore. And like, I can feel the organization slowing down. I can feel things starting to get slower. And so the question, starts to become like, well, why is that? Like, what are the, like, you have a general feeling, but like, when I'm going and engaging with clients, it's like the first thing that I do is I just go around and start asking people like, hey, what's the best thing about working here? What's the worst thing about working here? Like, what is one thing, if you could change it, that you would change? Because the people who are closest to the information, which are the people who are, sort of what you'd call like the front line or the first line, they know what the problems are. They can feel it. They see it every day. In fact, a lot of times they also know what the solution is. They may not have the ability to do anything about it, but they can feel it because they're the ones who are closest to the information, right? And so, we talk a lot about like, engineering leadership and IT leadership and all these great things, but like, those people aren't closest to the information. And, there's this great analogy, they call it the iceberg of ignorance, which is basically like at the C-suite level, they only have access to like 5% of the information about what's going on in the company. And then as you move further down to what I picked up this term literally yesterday and tweeted about it, connecting leaders. which is what we call like sort of the first level managers or the middle managers, like they have access to so much more information because they're closer to it. And then, obviously the people who are engineers who are working on it every day, they have access to the most amount of information. But we start talking to them about like, why do you feel like things are slowing down? Like, hey, so you're telling me that in order to ship your, container to production, you have to open up a ticket with the SRE team, which is awesome. SRE is like what we just call, the new what we called DevOps before and whatever. But like you have to open up a ticket with the SRE team. Why? Well, we've always done it like that. Okay, but why? And then you really start digging into like, what are the things that are preventing us from going fast, and what are the things that are preventing us from delivering with quality? Hey, it turns out like 60% of the time that we release stuff, it breaks. Why? Well, what could we do about that? Like, I don't, for me, like, I don't do a lot of going in and telling people what to do. That is very much not my style. I do a lot of listening and doing a lot of like highlighting, hey, I've heard from 5 different engineers that they're really sick of opening up a ticket every time they have to push a container to production. What's the purpose of that? What are we trying to accomplish, right? And we talk about this a lot in DevOps. What are we trying to accomplish? It comes up a lot in compliance. Oh, we can't do DevOps here because we have to be PCI compliant, or we have to do high trust because we're a healthcare company, or we have to, SOX this, or that's not, most of the time the regulations don't actually tell you how to implement the control. They tell you what you're trying to accomplish, what you're trying to accomplish. And there's lots of ways to accomplish those things. And so if you really want to hear me go crazy on this one, there's a great pamphlet we wrote for IT Revolution that's linked on my website, Mango Tech, which was about specifically this idea of separation of concerns. That's the solution to all of our PCI problems, is separation of concerns. And it turns out that if you read the guidance for the PCI, regulations, it doesn't say separation of concerns anywhere. It's not in there. It doesn't exist. Like, they talk about the fact that you shouldn't be able to ship code to production without any kind of oversight whatsoever. That's what it says. And so, what do people say? That means that only operations can push to production and only devs can write code because there has to be oversight. Well, what about if you made code reviews mandatory? Oh, well, that would actually satisfy the regulation. So, it's really about what are we trying to accomplish? And so, we spend a lot of time, or I spend a lot of time with clients saying, what are we trying to accomplish? And are there ways that we can do this that allow us to go faster and deliver with quality?
I love this, especially when you talk about how you talk to engineers and that they have the information and that perhaps they even know how to solve it, but the information doesn't necessarily reach the C-level, the C-suite. So this is actually fascinating. So can you tell me a bit more now about the relationship between Agile and DevOps? Can you do Agile without DevOps?
Absolutely. I mean, if you're sort of like asking, like, can you deliver with speed but without quality? Mm-hmm. Yes, you can absolutely go as fast as you want shipping garbage code out to production. There's nothing standing in your way of that, right? Agile is a software development methodology, right? I like to think of DevOps as much more of a software delivery methodology, right? There's, it's being able to deliver software repeatably, reliably, on our sprint boundaries, those kinds of things. I mean, those are very valuable things in terms of predictability, right? And so a lot of people also seem to get release engineering and DevOps confused, just like they could get Agile and DevOps confused. There's more to software delivery than just getting code in production. Again, like, what happens if it goes into production and it fails? And so, for people in the room, like, here's a free tip that I give to a lot of my my clients is, don't ship software out in production unless you've tested some of the failure modes before you do that. So like a lot of the SRE teams that I've worked with in the past and even do with clients now, they sit down with the developers before a new service or new capability goes out, and they say, what are the potential failure modes here? Like what if we lose access to the production database? What if we're dropping 50% of packets to the Reddit cache? And then they go in and they actually test those things. Generally, for the companies that are not as advanced, they're going to do that in a staging environment. But you don't want to find out that if the Redis, gets failed over by AWS, you need to refresh DNS to find out where the new Redis went to. You don't want to find that out for the very first time when you're running in production. You want to test those things. And really, when you look at it from sort of the leading edge of where the DevOps movement is going, you want to be building shared mental models between the development team and, let's say, the SRE team, or within the SRE team. How does this system operate? Because when you actually get into those situations, when you have a failure, the better your mental model of how the system actually operates, the faster you're going to be able to recover from those problems. And things are going to fail. That's a guarantee. We all know this, number one. And number two, like, where does release engineering come in when we're talking about, these are called game days? Like, this isn't about release engineering anymore. This is about DevOps. And like, this is like making sure I have my code instrumented well. And if it's not instrumented, and if something that I need to understand isn't instrumented, how hard is it to instrument that thing? Right? If I want to say like, hey, how big is this cache, or what's the latency on this cache, and I don't have that number, I need to have the ability to get that number, because that's how I'm going to test my hypothesis during an outage. Hey, it turns out, wow, this thing, the size of the number of items in the cache is growing exponentially. Is this normal? I don't know, but it seems really weird, and like, if we don't have this ability, then, we're going to have much longer TTRs if you want to, you want to pull it back to our accelerate 4 key metrics. And so that's why DevOps is beyond just Agile, and it's beyond just release engineering, because release engineering doesn't take any of those things into account.
Yeah, got it. We have a question on the chat. What do you think about testing strategies? How would you test code? And in particular, I would actually add, how would you test the infrastructure code and the configuration management code?
Yeah, I mean, my Bible for testing strategies is the continuous delivery book that we talked about before. But one of the things that really, even when we're doing service delivery assessments with clients, like, one of the things that we really focus in on is how long does it take for a developer to get feedback on the code that they've written. And so if you read the book, spoiler alert, I guess, for a decade-old book, but they basically talk about this idea of about the amount of time it takes to get a cup of coffee. So if I'm a developer, I write some code, I check it in, I go get coffee. When I come back to my desk, I should have a very good idea of whether or not my tests, passed. And so it starts to become a little bit of a race there, like how much testing can I do in whatever that is, 10 or 12 minutes. And so, usually people are going to focus a lot on unit tests at that point. And then we move into more of the things, integration tests, performance tests, security tests, all those other kinds of things can come later. But you want the developers to know, really quickly whether or not the code that they've checked in is like functional, things like that, because it's so much cheaper to fix things in development than to fix things later, right? Imagine you have a bug that makes it out into production that you could have caught in, you're on your desktop. Now I got to get like VP approval for an emergency change that does this and blah, blah. There's all kinds of crazy. And then, our customers might be affected. That's really expensive. Or like, if it takes me too long to ship my code, it takes, let's say I check my code in and then there's, 4 weeks before it gets out to production, and we find a bug, and I go to the developer and I say, hey, we found the bug in, line 600. And they're like, oh, okay, give me some time. I need to refamiliarize myself with that code because I wrote it a month ago. I don't really remember what was going on there. Why did I implement it this way? Oh, well, at least I wrote a good code comment to myself to explain. But if I get feedback within 10 minutes, I just wrote the code. Like, oh yeah, ooh, whoops, done, fixed. And it's just so much cheaper and faster to get that fast feedback. And then with infrastructure code, obviously, not obviously, I guess, but like I always tell people, like, build your, pre-prod environments with the exact same code that you build your production environments with. There can be configuration, changes, sure. Like I may not need a C4, 4x large in staging or development like I do in production. Maybe that's just a regular large or something like that. There's no point spending your whole budget on something that's not necessary, but you don't want to have your staging environment configured one way and your production environment configured another way. And then people go, well, it's close enough. Well, it's close enough until you get that bug that breaks everything. Right. And then it turns out it wasn't that close enough. And there's no point, right? If you're doing infrastructure as code, then you should be, writing that code to build those environments anyways. And so by the time I've gone to production, I've built multiple environments. I've torn down environments and built them again. I've done all those things. So, if Gene Kim's third way is repetition and practice lead to mastery, what he's really talking about is more of those game day scenarios. But at the same time, like the whole point of infrastructure as code, which I sometimes gets lost on people, is it's like code, infrastructure as code, right? And so just like with our code, if we've run it, we've tested it a number of times, then like the same thing's going to apply for infrastructure as code. If we've run it, we've tested it a number of times, we're going to have a higher degree of confidence, which is one of the things that, Humble and Farley talk about in their book, is like we talk about how much confidence we're going to have when we ship code. If we've tested it and run it multiple times, we're going to have a higher degree of confidence that when we use that code for, our production environments and things like that, that we're going to get the right outcomes.
Right. We are nearing the end. I am going to extend a little bit because I have two more questions here. One, I only received it by direct message, and that's, can ITIL and IT4IT frameworks exist and complement a DevOps environment, or are they outdated for a true Agile/DevOps environment?
Oh man, this is such like almost a holy war of like VI versus Emacs. So I mean, ITIL has a place, right? But I think it's important to remember like where ITIL comes from. And so ITIL is, a body of recommendations put out by like a British government agency about like the way that you should be running your systems. And I think it's very difficult for ITIL to keep up with the pace of change that's going on in our industry. Like, what does ITIL have to say about serverless? I don't know. I mean, I'm not a super expert on ITIL, but I know that I just did an assessment of a company that basically embraced serverless principles full on, and like they don't run servers and they don't do all this stuff, and what does that mean from a service delivery perspective? And they did great until we started talking about, well, what happens if something breaks, and then that things started to get a little bit more fuzzy. But like what does ITIL have to say about serverless? And one of the things I loved about ITIL when I used to run infrastructure in a data center was the idea of the configuration management database. But what does a configuration management database look like in the cloud? I can tell you the answer to that. It looks like the service provider's API with tagging. Like all the stuff I used to put in my database, now I just do as key value pairs with tagging on my infrastructure. So like, what does ITIL have to say about that? I mean, I think that there's a lot of good things from ITIL. I think I think it gets back to what we said earlier. Remember we talked about what are you trying to accomplish? I think it gets back to that. I think there's a lot of concepts with ITIL that if ITIL hasn't been able to keep up with what's going on, we can look at it and say, well, what were they trying to accomplish? And some of those things are going to be fine, and some of those things are going to sort of fall by the wayside, right? And we can go back to our configuration management database. Like if I was trying to run a configuration management database and keep track of all my cloud resources, it's basically a fool's errand, right? I mean, their infrastructure is going to disappear. That's what happens in the cloud. That's literally one of the things we have to think about when we're building cloud infrastructure. I'm not going to be able to pipe that information back into a configuration management database, because what do I do when I launch a container on ECS? And I'm not trying to pick on AWS, because I know all the things that all the different cloud providers on that one just probably is usually most familiar to the audience. But like if I launch a container on ECS and it lives for 350 milliseconds, do I put that back into my configuration management database? Like, I don't know. How do I collect metrics from that? Like, do I try to interrogate that container while it's running because it's been running for 350 milliseconds? I mean, my answer is going to be have the container emit metrics instead of going and trying to talk to it. But like, I think there's a lot of things that get super complicated when we're talking about things like ITIL, which I'm sure at some point are going to try to keep up, but at the same time, what the UK government's trying to get out of their production systems and what my like super awesome Silicon Valley AI ML something or other, startup is trying to do, maybe you're slightly different concerns there.
Great answer. All right. So do you have any last things you'd like to share with the audience before we go to the breakout rooms?
Let's go back to what we said earlier, like go to where the information is. Like if you feel like your company is slowing down now that we have all this organic growth, we hired 40 engineers last year or whatever, go to where the information is. If you're a leader, and ask like, hey, what have you seen with this? Like, what can we do better? One of the things I really try to advise people on is process is a sign of success. Don't introduce process until you need it. So many people come in and they're like, the answer to this is automatically the process hammer. Wham! And like, all that does is slow things down, like, typically. So like, don't do that unless you have to. And there's lots of ways around some of these problems if we think about it in a different way. And the answers are out there. And if you're an engineer, I think, there's this whole, concept of managing up. You can go to the business and say things like, hey, we want to go faster. We want to be able to beat the competition. We want to be able to outpace the market. These are things that, we've seen that allow the business to do better. And like, there are very few engineering leaders who are like, oh, no, we don't want to get better. We don't want to beat the competition. Like, they're getting pressure from their boss about like, this costs too much. We're going too slow. Like, how come we don't this? How come our competition? So like, those are the conversations to have, but like, really that's DevOps, right? Like, when I used to give like the what is DevOps talks back in like 2013 or whatever, it was always like the shorthand for DevOps is communication and collaboration. And like, really that's, that's making like information transparent and all that other kind of stuff. But turns out, weird, that's the stuff that enables the business to go faster. And so, Ron Westrum is famous for his Westrum typology of like organizational structure. And they have like the bureaucratic, the pathological, and the generative cultures. Like, go look at it's not hard to look for Westrum topology, but like, go look down the generative culture, right? It's all these companies that are these organizations, really, they're not even companies, that have like open communication and they trust people and they, I hate to say this way, but like treat them like adults and stuff like that. And it turns out those organizations really outperform the other organizations.
Excellent, thanks. So communication and collaboration are the keywords. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to start the breakout rooms. Oh, one more thing. So I'm sorry, Madi, I'm not going to get to your question because we've run out of time. But one more thing to you, Dave. So if Magdi or anybody else wants to ask you further question, how do they get hold of you?
Yeah, definitely check out mangotech.com. It's MANGOTEQUE. So it is a play on my last name being French, and so then tech with TEQUE. But you can get my email, my Twitter, my LinkedIn, all that stuff is available right there. Links to things I've written, podcasts I've been on. I mean, it's all your one-stop shop, and I'm happy to to field any questions. The last thing is also as someone who came up with DevOps engineers and systems administrators and SREs and all that other fun stuff. If some things that people have been doing during the pandemic was, and now California is opening today, so I don't know what that's going to look like, but they've been having like virtual happy hours. And so I'd love to jump in on virtual happy hours with SRE teams if they do them, because I love hanging out with those engineers and hearing about like the different problems that they're facing, stuff like that, because it's really, it changes a lot. So it's fascinating to keep up with.
Great. Fantastic.